Hello everyone, my name is Mirhat Sharibjan and welcome to Eurasian Express. Today we're going to talk about the Taliban again. Namely, we're going to talk about the Taliban representatives' recent visit to the European Union, to Brussels. I wouldn't be mistaken if I said that this visit of the Taliban representatives to the European Union was a real surprise for many in the West, and here is why. For nearly 5 years, the European Union insisted that there could be no normalization of ties, of relations with the Taliban unless Afghanistan's new rulers respected human rights, established an inclusive government with representatives of Tajiks, Uzbeks, Turkmens, and other ethnic groups, and prevented terrorism from spreading beyond Afghanistan's border. None of those conditions has been fully met. Women remain excluded from most areas of public life. Political opposition is virtually non-existent in Afghanistan. Afghanistan continues to face a severe humanitarian crisis, and the United Nations regularly reports serious human rights violations there. Meanwhile, last month, Taliban representatives were sitting in Brussels. Officially, these were only quote-unquote technical talks. European officials say the meetings focused on one specific issue: the return of Afghan migrants whose asylum applications were rejected in Europe. They stress that these discussions do not amount to diplomatic recognition. However, it is very well known that international politics has always operated according to two different sets of rules. One is based on values, principle, democracy, the operation of democratic institutions, and human rights. The other is based on geography, security, borders, trade, migration, and power. Sometimes these two sets of rules move together, but very often they do not. When the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power in Russia in 1917, much of the world refused to recognize the new government. The Western powers questioned its legitimacy. The new regime had overthrown the provisional government by force, dissolved the democratically elected Constituent Assembly, executed the imperial family, rejected Russia's foreign debts, and openly called for a worldwide communist revolution. Many governments believed that the Soviet regime would not survive. We know that it did, and even lasted until late 1991. Well, gradually, country after country established diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union at the time. Not because they approved Bolshevik ideology, but because they had to deal with a government that actually controlled the world's largest country. Another example is China. After Mao Zedong proclaimed the People's Republic of China in 1949, many Western countries continued to recognize the government that had retreated to Taiwan. For decades, Communist China remained outside much of the Western diplomatic system. Then geopolitical realities changed. As relations between Beijing and Moscow deteriorated during the Cold War, Washington reassessed its strategy. Eventually, the United States and China established diplomatic relations. Again, ideology had not changed dramatically, but strategic reality had. Today, Afghanistan appears to be following a similar pattern. The Taliban has demonstrated that they are the only force capable of governing the country. Whether the international community likes the fact or not is becoming increasingly irrelevant when dealing with practical issues, such as, again, migration, counterterrorism, regional stability, broader security, which is very important for the Central Asian countries, humanitarian aid, you name it. None of these challenges can be addressed without at least some kind of communication with the authorities that actually control Afghanistan. But while Europe is opening technical channels of communication, events along Afghanistan's borders reminds us why the Taliban remains such a controversial partner. Just weeks after European officials concluded the meeting with the Taliban representatives in Brussels, the government of a Central Asian nation, Tajikistan, released alarming new figures. According to authorities in Dushanbe, during the first half of 2026, Tajik security forces engaged in 7 armed clashes with suspected Afghan drug smugglers along the border. 17 people were reportedly killed. We don't know exactly if those 17 people all of them were Afghans or some Tajiks were involved. Officials also announced the seizure of more than 1.5 tons of illegal drugs. Even more concerning, Tajik authorities warned that production of synthetic drugs appears to be growing inside Afghanistan. These claims directly contradict repeated statements by Taliban officials, who insist that drug production has dramatically declined since they returned to power in 2021. Independent verification remains extremely difficult. Several international assessments have indeed reported a sharp decline in opium cultivation after the Taliban banned poppy production. At the same time, regional security agencies increasingly warn that synthetic narcotics may be replacing part of that illicit economy. If true, the nature of Afghanistan's drug trade may be changing rather than disappearing. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's neighbors continue facing difficult security challenges. Pakistan repeatedly accuses the Afghan Taliban of maintaining close ties with Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, an armed militant group responsible for deadly attacks inside Pakistan. Relations between Kabul and Islamabad have deteriorated significantly over the past several years. At the same time, Central Asian governments remain deeply concerned about border security, extremism, illegal migration, and organized crime. But despite all these concerns, almost every country in the region has established some kind of practical contact with the Taliban government. You may ask why? Well, because geography leaves them no choice. The same logic increasingly applies to Europe. Brussels seems to understand that deporting Afghan migrants, coordinating humanitarian aid, preventing security threats, and managing future migration require communication with whoever exercises effective authority inside Afghanistan. The European Union continues to criticize the Taliban's treatment of women, restrictions on education, public executions, and broader human rights violations. Human rights groups have strongly condemned the Brussels meetings. Amnesty International described Taliban's visit to Brussels as deeply troubling, arguing that engaging with Taliban officials risks legitimizing one of the world's most repressive governments. European officials reject that interpretation. They argue that refusing all contact would make solving practical problems even more difficult, while offering no improvement for ordinary Afghans. Whether that argument proves correct remains to be seen. But history suggests that governments often negotiate with regimes they strongly dislike. International politics is filled with many examples where recognition followed many years or even decades after a regime first took power. Afghanistan may become another chapter in that long history. Whether the Taliban eventually receive broader international recognition remains uncertain. Their human rights record continues to generate widespread condemnation. Their treatment of women remains one of the greatest obstacles to normalization, and many governments remain deeply skeptical of the movement's long-term intentions. But one lesson already seems clear. International legitimacy and effective control are not the same thing. Countries do not always negotiate with governments they like or support. Very often they negotiate with governments that hold real power. That may be one of the least comfortable truths of international relations. But history shows it again and again. And now, Brussels' first technical talks with the Taliban may be remembered as another example of that enduring reality. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis useful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe that engaging with the Taliban is a necessary act of realism? Or do you think that it is a dangerous step toward legitimizing an authoritarian regime? I look forward to reading your comments. I promise I read all of them, but unfortunately I don't have time to respond to all of them. I do my best. See you in the next episode of Eurasian Express with Mirhat Sharifjan. Bye-bye.